3 days into the furore surrounding the behaviour of the unnamed BBC presenter, and the plot has tonight thickened considerably. A lawyer for the young person at the heart of it said the Sun's account was rubbish and nothing inappropriate happened.
It's very, very difficult for the BBC to know quite what it needs to do next, when really I think it's the police who are going to make the crucial next step.
The newspaper is sticking to its story, so the BBC has a number of overlapping matters to consider. Whose account do they believe? And do newly toughened up laws on privacy restrict their freedom of movement as an employer? We'll try to make sense of it tonight. It will just make inflation worse. The Chancellor warns against public sector pay rises. President Biden swings through London, but what do we learn about the tricky issues of the moment, like Ukraine's proposed membership of NATO? Stabbed in a school corridor, a shocking attack on a teacher in Tewkesbury, and a new take on an old tradition, the very modern war artist.
I'm trying to be analogue in a digital world, and sometimes it works.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. If you were thinking some degree of clarity might have emerged by now in the controversy over a well-known BBC presenter, well, you might have to think again. The 20-year-old person at the centre of claims that a top BBC presenter paid them large sums of money for sexually explicit images tonight described the allegations as rubbish. The young person's words via a lawyer were emphatic. Nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place. The spotlight, therefore, falls back on The Sun, which carried the initial claims without any comment from the young person themselves. Earlier today, senior figures from the BBC, which has suspended the presenter, held a meeting with detectives, after which police said no investigation has yet been launched, but further inquiries are being carried out. Meanwhile, the presenter, about whom the allegations are being made, remains unidentified.
At BBC headquarters, they're used to balancing different views, but tonight the competing claims are proving especially complex. Did one of their presenters, suspended from appearing on camera, deserve to become the story? This evening, a lawyer acting for the young person alleged to have been paid for pictures by the star stated in a letter, "For the avoidance of doubt, nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place between our client and the BBC personality, and the allegations reported in the Sun newspaper are rubbish."
It's very, very difficult for the BBC to know quite what it needs to do next, when really I think it's the police who are going to make the crucial next step. They've said that they're going to make inquiries. They haven't said investigation, which is a sort of more formal step. But they will look at the competing claims, really.
So what do we know? A complaint was made to the BBC in May this year, but the corporation says the allegations made by the mother in The Sun on Thursday were new. By Friday night, the story had hit the paper's front page, but The Sun's now accused of not even contacting the young person involved prior to publication. On Sunday, the unnamed presenter was formally suspended from his job and police were called in.
When were you first made aware of allegations?
BBC executives have faced days of questions. Now, The Sun will too. Tonight, the paper said in a statement, "We have reported a story about two very concerned parents who made a complaint to the BBC about the behaviour of a presenter and the welfare of their child. We have seen evidence that supports their concerns. It's now for the BBC to properly investigate."
The Sun's credibility is at risk in terms of the extent to which you can believe what you read in the paper. And at present, there's lots of questions about why the Sun proceeded to publish this story, what materials it had that meant that it was comfortable publishing the story.
Tonight, police are still weighing up any evidence they have before deciding whether or not to investigate, with the reputations of more than one individual and one organisation at stake.
So, Paul is here. I think if I say this is very confusing, that is putting it mildly. It appears to be the son's account of what the parents appear to have to say on one account, the lawyer's account of what the young person has to say on the other. How does the BBC make sense of that?
Well, it's very difficult when there are competing truths tonight, and both sides in this story are doubling down. So the Sun newspaper, for example, has published a fresh story this evening saying the parents of this young person stand by the allegations that they've made in the Sun newspaper. But on the flip side, the lawyer representing the young person says that that young person has been estranged from their parents for several years. So throwing doubt on the testimony of the parents. I think there's one very interesting thing in the Sun's copy this evening, which is that they say the stepfather of this young person, in a quote from him, did actually raise concerns with the police in May and was told by police that they couldn't do anything because they didn't think there was any illegality. So why did the Sun then continue to publish the story? I think that's a big question tonight. Now, the paper says it has a dossier of evidence that it passed to the BBC. The BBC says it's sharing information with the Metropolitan Police. So really it will be up to the Met now, I think, to decide whose reputation here comes out intact.
I mean, who knows where the BBC gets to on establishing the truth or not. We've heard a lot of talk about privacy laws. Is it the case that sort of toughened privacy laws hamper the BBC's room for manoeuvre anyway, or is that overstated?
Yeah, because I think if the Met decide that there's nothing illegal to look into here, then we're into very difficult territory for the BBC, because we're into the realms of morality. And does the BBC really want to be playing sort of judge and jury in the life of a presenter, the private life of a presenter? Then, if there's nothing illegal, then, you know, there may have been other things that were inadvisable. We don't know, and we're not going to speculate tonight. But privacy law has shifted significantly in favour of the privacy of the individual in recent years. And so it will be very difficult for the BBC, I think, to get involved in all of that, though it may be decided that there is so much speculation in the public domain now that the credibility of this individual presenter is so badly damaged that they may agree with the BBC either to stand down or to make some kind of public statement about all of this.
OK, it gets more complex by the day. Paul, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, it is traditionally a landmark in the financial year, but the Chancellor's annual Mansion House speech in the city tonight shone a harsh spotlight on some of the economic fault lines facing the government. Jeremy Hunt underlined his main priority of tackling inflation and issued a warning about the impacts of public sector pay rises.
Taking responsible decisions on public finances, including public sector pay, because more borrowing is itself inflationary. It means recognising that bringing down inflation puts more money into people's pockets than any tax cut. And it means recognising that there can be no sustainable growth without eliminating the inflation that deters investment and erodes consumer confidence.
So, where will this leave the Treasury when pay review bodies make their final recommendations for the public sector, such as those for nurses, doctors and teachers? Robert was, of course, listening to the speech, and he joins me now. Where does this leave government departments hoping to fund pay rises?
So look, what the Chancellor has effectively done tonight, shine a spotlight on the big argument within Cabinet. The pay review bodies haven't said publicly what they're recommending, but I understand that they are saying nurses, teachers, other civil servants, public sector workers should get a pay rise of around 6%. Now, that is a lot less than the rate of inflation, 8.7%. It's a lot less than pay settlements in the private sector, running about 7.6%. But it is, gosh, about 3 times more than individual departments were expecting when they were given their budgets a couple of years ago. So what we have is things like people like the Secretary of State for Health, Steve Barclay, head of the Education Department, various other departments employing hundreds of thousands, millions of public sector workers wanting to pay 6%. But you've just heard the Chancellor tonight not saying they can't pay 6%, but saying he will not borrow money to fund the billions that are required. So what he's effectively saying to them, if you want to give a 6% pay rise to nurses and teachers, you've got to find savings, you've got to make cuts. It's no secret that if you're in the health service, you say there's not enough money to clear the backlog and do all the things we want to do. If you within schools, they say we haven't got enough money to do our job. And so there is this, as I say, it's a massive argument within government. I can't tell you tonight how it will be resolved, but it is incredibly problematic because, apart from anything else, if they don't pay 6%, the problem that schools and hospitals have, which is not being able to recruit people, not being able to retain people, will get even worse.
OK, Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, everything was all smiles and warm handshakes today when President Biden stopped off at Downing Street and then Windsor Castle during his whistle-stop visit to the UK. But the cordial meetings with first Rishi Sunak and then King Charles only served to put a gloss on the more prickly issues lurking under the surface. The issue of, or America's pledge to, supply Ukraine with cluster bombs, for instance, or its potential membership of NATO. President Biden is in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, tonight for a NATO summit where those issues will undoubtedly come up. More on that in a moment. But first, what, if anything, did we learn from the president's London layover?
In Windsor this lunchtime, the man who was elected to the Oval Office meeting the man who ascended to the throne for the first time since the late Queen's funeral. President Biden didn't attend the coronation, and although some has seen that as a snub, in truth, no US president has ever come to such an event. After the ceremonials at Windsor Castle, the two men went inside for tea and a chat. Climate change, an issue close to both men's hearts, high on the agenda. The first stop on today's brief visit to the UK had been Downing Street. There are substantive differences between the British and US governments, but sitting in the number 10 garden, the two leaders painted a rosy picture.
Well, Joe, welcome. It's great to have you here, back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president.
President Biden joking about how often they had been meeting lately.
It's good to be back. You know, we've only been meeting once a month. We met in San Diego, Belfast, Hiroshima, Washington, here, and couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally. Our relationship is rock solid.
Much of the discussion in Downing Street was centred on defence. In truth, the reason Joe Biden is in the neighbourhood at all is to attend this week's NATO summit in Lithuania. But this has been the 6th meeting in 7 months between the President and the Prime Minister, and they did have a lot to talk about. There is plenty on which they agree, but also quite a bit on which they do not. The most recent difference is over the American decision to supply cluster bombs to Ukraine's military. The UK is opposed to the weapons, which spread multiple explosives over a wide area. The Prime Minister's spokesman said Mr Sunak did raise the issue of cluster bombs with President Biden, but denied reports of differences over Ukraine's eventual membership of NATO. The two men will see each other yet again in Vilnius tomorrow. Carl Dinning, News at 10, Downing Street.
Well, as we said, James is in Vilnius right now, as you can see. And James, Ukraine's path to NATO membership remains, I guess, the key focus for the summit. But there's been some breaking news this evening about another prospective member.
Yes, a big breakthrough tonight because Turkey's President Erdogan has dropped his long-term opposition to Sweden joining the alliance. Now, the Turks have been blocking Sweden because they're unhappy about the activities of Kurdish opponents of the regime in Ankara in Sweden. Well, it does seem that President Erdogan has got sufficient leverage out of this, got all the concessions he thinks he can get. And tonight it's been announced that Sweden will now join Finland, the 31st and 32nd members of the alliance. But it's the potential 33rd, Ukraine, that's going to dominate this summit over the next few days. I mean, here in the Baltic states in Eastern Europe, there's huge enthusiasm for getting Ukraine into NATO as soon as possible. Now, President Biden, who arrived here this evening, is is saying, no, hang on a minute, backed by Germany, with some reservations also from the UK. He's saying, you know what, this may get us into a war with Russia if we do this too soon. It may actually hinder any attempt to achieve a peace deal or even a ceasefire there, and he wants to slow down on it. I suspect there will be a compromise here which will see a speedier route to membership for Ukraine agreed once the war is finished, crucially, and that in the meantime Ukraine will get enhanced security guarantees, particularly from the US.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here now in the shocking moment today when violence flared in a secondary school corridor, leaving a teacher being treated in hospital for a stab wound. A teenage boy is being questioned on suspicion of attempted murder after the male teacher was attacked at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire at just after 9 o'clock this morning. The teenager was arrested nearby 2 hours later. The teacher was tonight discharged from hospital.
The new week at this high school in Gloucestershire began with an emergency in the corridor where a male teacher was stabbed just as the school day got started. The alarm was raised a few minutes after 9 o'clock and ambulances arrived to deal with the casualty, while the priority for the police to find the attacker and make sure no one else was hurt.
The academy was locked down and 2 neighbouring schools were asked to close their doors as a precaution. Specialist resources, including the National Police Air Service and plainclothes officers, were deployed to search the wider area, and thanks to their efforts, the suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers.
In the minutes after the stabbing this morning, the police said it was initially thought that the attacker had hidden himself within the school grounds, but following what they described as an extensive search, a boy was found and arrested in the nearby village of Stoke Orchard at 11 o'clock. A knife was seized during the arrest. The teenager is being questioned by police on suspicion of attempted murder. Parents of pupils at the school had received messages from their children as the incident was unfolding.
My son Alex was able to message me to say he was okay. He was safe, he was in the drama room, there were teachers with him, they were barricaded in.
You hear it all around the world in different places, but you don't expect it on your own doorstep.
We just want to see our children and really just want to thank the teachers, because obviously they've had an absolute nightmare of a morning, and hope and pray that the teacher who's been injured is okay.
The teacher who was stabbed was discharged from hospital tonight, while the suspect remains in custody. The police say the motive for the attack is unclear. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Families were seen to weep at a public meeting today about the review into maternity care failings at the Nottingham University Hospitals Trust. Members of many of the 1,700 families whose cases will be examined in the review were there. They heard the woman leading the inquiry, midwifery expert Donna Ockenden, pledge that she would do all she can to make sure no one else suffers harm. It could be the NHS's biggest ever maternity scandal. Campaigners cautioned the government today over its scheme to improve the support given to victims of rape and other serious sexual offences. From today, the programme will be rolled out across all 43 police forces in England and Wales after being piloted in 19 of them. Ministers say significant progress has already been made under Operation Soteria, named after the Greek goddess of safety and deliverance from harm. But women say the justice system remains heavily weighted against survivors of rape and in favour of those accused.
He attacked me. It involved a knife.
Catherine Araniello knows all too well why rape convictions in this country are so low. A week before her case against the man charged with violently raping her was due in court, it was dropped with no explanation.
That evening, I remember going home thinking, what is there left to live for? Now, bearing in mind, I'd been raped at knife point and beaten up, and that did not leave me feeling suicidal. But the treatment of the CPS, a system that I trusted and I'd put all of my faith in and disclosed, really sensitive personal information to, that was the biggest betrayal of all for me.
Between April and December 2022, there were 50,000 rape offences recorded in England and Wales. Of these, less than 2% resulted in a charge or court summons. The number of adult rape cases referred to the Crown Prosecution Service has risen by 41% compared to 2016, but that's still only just over 1,000 cases. In an effort to change that, the government has announced a pilot scheme that will give specialist training to police investigators and make the process more victim-centred, is being rolled out across England and Wales.
I am absolutely committed to saying the system is not perfect yet, not by a long chalk, but equally in the interest of balance, it has improved. And there is a lot of support being provided to victims now. And because listeners, people watching this...
So what can you say to reassure women who are wondering whether it's even worth going to police?
What I would like to say is there is support out there, point one. Point two, it's available in a very transparent way.
In some courts, like here in Newcastle, they're also piloting ways to make the court experience less traumatic. Victims can pre-record their cross-examination via video link instead of facing their attacker across a courtroom. Labour welcomes those steps but says it's not enough.
Any progress is to be welcomed, but when you start from such an utterly low base of, less than 2% of people who come forward and say that they've been raped will ever see the inside of a police station, let alone the inside of a courtroom in their cases. It's like doubling it from 1 to 2.
The government claims their changes are already showing tangible results, but still far too many survivors of both sexes are finding reporting rape is the start of a whole new trauma. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
At least 22 people have been killed after 3 days of torrential monsoon rains deluged northern India, causing catastrophic flash floods. The raging waters engulfing towns and villages swept away buildings and bridges and also caused a number of landslides. Tonight, neighbouring Pakistan is on flood alert.
Ripping through streets, mudslides ravaged the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. 3 days of relentless rain battering its towns, wiping out homes. The force of the water tearing down bridges and devastating swathes of the north of the country.
Road restoration will take some time, but our priority is to restore electricity and mobile networks so that we can receive information regarding any other stranded people so we can rescue them.
At least 22 people have been killed in this bout of flash flooding. Parts of the country's capital, New Delhi, left overflowing over the weekend. Water leaving residents stranded, leading to precarious rescue efforts. Roads now completely submerged. Schools have shut and hundreds have turned to trains to escape. But in the provinces, many have been told to stay inside. More than a month into its monsoon season, India regularly sees severe floods. But this year, experts say there's been higher than average rainfall, an increase many put down to climate change. It's also led to questions from residents as to why the country isn't more prepared. Rescue efforts are ongoing, but the rain is refusing to ease, with more destruction forecast in the next few days. Charlie Frost, News at 10.
Back here, and campaigners want it to be compulsory for all new build houses to make room for nests of swifts. Numbers of these extraordinary acrobats of the air have been in decline, and it's thought one reason could be a shortage of their traditional nesting grounds under the eaves of houses. A solution to that could be a type of brick specially adapted to accommodate nesting swifts.
It is one of the distinctive sights and sounds of the summer. Swifts pay only a fleeting visit to Britain every year, flying 14,000 miles from Africa and back to nest and raise their chicks. But our modern house designs lack the natural crevices they rely on.
Right, so there's 3 chicks minding their own business.
For the past 20 years, Dick Newell has been installing swift boxes in church belfries in Cambridgeshire and building swift bricks like these that can be fitted to buildings to create safe swift spaces.
20 years ago we had a small handful of pairs of swifts. We have been putting up nest boxes over the last 20 years. We've now got over 70 pairs of swifts in a population of 800 people. You know, the average official density of swifts across the country is less than 1 pair of swifts per 1,500 people.
Here in the village of Fulbourn, they take their swifts very seriously, carefully counting the pairs nesting in swift bricks installed in house walls. MPs are debating whether to make swift bricks compulsory in all new build homes after 110,000 people signed a petition started by Hannah Bourne-Taylor.
They're the birds that share our walls. They're the birds that we see on a daily basis. Swifts are the birds that give us incredible aerial displays in the summer that are so distinctive to even people that aren't that sure about all birds. So I think they bring a lot of joy to communities. They're true urban birds. And also they've been around for 65 million years. I think we owe them some sort of safeguarding debt.
The swift population has seen a decline of more than 50% over 30 years. Campaigners say brick by brick, we can help build up their numbers again. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
Now in sport, you might say tonight, watch out Novak Djokovic. At Wimbledon today, Carlos Alcaraz gave yet more evidence of the kind of speed and shot-making that's turning him into the next tennis superstar. The 20-year-old Spanish player, this year's top seed at Wimbledon, ended the run of the Italian player Matteo Berrettini in 4 sets. The fairy tale continued for the surprise package of the men's tournament. The unseeded American Chris Eubanks, he knocked out the number 5 seed Stefanos Tsitsipas in 5 hard-fought sets. Finally, news travels fast, of course, in our digital age. Images of war, for instance, often reach us within moments. Previously, though, it was artists like Paul Nash, painter of this hauntingly devastating scene from World War I, who were given the task of depicting what it was like to be there. Britain has appointed scores of official war artists since that conflict, with Nash, who also worked in the Second World War, amongst the most well-known. And despite advances in technology, the war artist has continued to play a part. In the 80s, for instance, Linda Kitson was an official artist for the Falklands War. Now there is George Butler, an illustrator whose images follow a noble tradition that may be old-fashioned, but nevertheless provides a unique perspective.
He sits quietly in a war zone with ink and paper. George Butler's style of capturing conflict is a slow and steady process.
I'm trying to be analogue in a digital world, and sometimes it works. But there's, I think, something about being slow, deliberately slow, that is, I think it's got to have some value.
Later this week, he will be exhibiting his pictures from his visits to Taliban-held Afghanistan. His use of drawings rather than a camera allowing him access to women-only spaces, welcomed in by them, hospitals allowing him in for long periods.
This is a little girl called Malalai. She was 3 and in a hospital in Lashkargah, which is in Helmand province.
How were you allowed to be in this room with this woman giving birth?
I spent so much time in the maternity ward, and at the beginning there's, as with always in Afghanistan, there's lots of, veils being pulled across faces when strange men come into rooms. But after a while, these sort of young women I just became part of the furniture and was ignored, which was exactly what I wanted.
Earlier this year, Butler went to Turkey, where once more, with his ink and watercolours, he recorded the devastation left by a series of earthquakes.
And if that's sort of not sad enough, opposite the building were all of the relatives of people waiting on sofas and armchairs, lighting fires, and
they didn't mind you drawing them?
This guy called Uday came up to me. He said, "Can I have a copy when you're finished?" And I must have looked at him in a funny way, because I was like, why would you want a drawing of this moment? And again, he just wrote his phone number on my thing, and he said, so that I can remember.
His visits to Ukraine, drawing civilians, getting rare access to a secret facility where tanks and armoured vehicles, some of them Russian, are repaired for reuse by the Ukrainian army, will be published in a new book.
All the stories that I'm kind of collating at the moment are of people that could so easily be forgotten had we not just by chance sat down spent some time with them.
He can't compete with cameras for speed, but by taking it slowly, George Butler says he's offering a different perspective. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
And that feels like a good place to end tonight. I will be back, same time, same place tomorrow. See you then. For now, good night. Thanks for watching.